When Mrs. John E. Cook entered a recipe contest sponsored by Knox Gelatin in 1905, she set expectations high. The Newcastle, Pennsylvania resident dubbed her submission Perfection Salad. Whether or not it lived up to the name depends on your taste. It featured common salad ingredients like chopped cabbage, red peppers, celery, all suspended in a gelatinous package. To serve it, Cook recommended scooping the squishy concoction into hollowed out bell peppers. Perfection Salad didn't win the top prize, but it was hardly a failure. The panel of judges, which included Boston Cooking School cookbook author Fannie Farmer, awarded Miss Cook third place and sent her home with a $100 prize. And that was just the beginning of the dish's success. Though modern diners may think Perfection Salad stretches the definitions of both perfection and salad, turned out to be exactly what Americans were craving at a pivotal moment in history. And speaking of craving, I am particularly not craving a bite of this horrifying concoction, the Ring Around the Tuna from 1962's Joys of Jell-O, but for you all, I will try it. Oh boy, this is gonna be bad. Hi, I'm Justin Dodd. Welcome to Food History. Though it occasionally appears at church potlucks and Thanksgiving celebrations, Jell-O salad is largely considered a relic of a bygone era. It's hard to believe that half a century ago, the dish was seen as an elegant addition to any dinner spread. Before I get into the decline of Jell-O salad, let's start at the recipe's not-so-humble beginnings. Gelatin was a delicacy in pre-industrial Europe. To make it, cooks boiled ingredients like animal bones and tendons for hours, strained the liquid, and then waited for a jelly-like substance to congeal on the surface. The gel was made from collagen, the proteins that provide structure to connective tissues in the body. The cartilage connecting bones contains a lot of collagen, which is why animal bones are a common source of the ingredient in cooking. Because drawing collagen out of bones is such a slow, labor-intensive process, only the wealthiest homes with fully staffed kitchens had the resources to make gelatin outside of special occasions. These households made the most of it by molding gelatin into impressive structures called aspics that encased other components. Dishes became even more elaborate as the centuries progressed. In the 18th century, famous French chef Marie-Antoine Carême brought gelatin to Napoleon's imperial court. His aspics included fine ingredients such as truffles, sweetbreads, and calves' tongues. As is the case with many French foods, Thomas Jefferson is credited with introducing gelatin to America, and as is the case with roughly all of those foods, it's not true. There are recipes in the colonies for calf's foot jellies decades before Jefferson started talking about them. But Jefferson was a fan of jelly dishes. He developed a taste for the unique texture while living overseas, and he had his enslaved chef, James Hemings, recreated back home in Virginia. Hemings used the formal culinary training he received during Jefferson's diplomatic mission to France to make a wine jelly flavored with lemon, sugar, and nutmeg. Jefferson reportedly loved gelatinous dishes so much that he considered renaming his famous plantation Monticello. Okay, that one's not true, but in my defense, I'm an idiot. As wealthy Americans started serving aspics at dinner parties, scientists were working to bring gelatin to the masses. Made from the parts of livestock many people throw away, gelatin had the potential to be a cheap protein source. It was the process of preparing it that required valuable time and labor most families couldn't afford to spare. American engineer Peter Cooper offered a solution to this conundrum when he secured a patent for the world's first powdered gelatin in 1845. His product consisted of dried up granules that could be reconstituted with water at home. Packages of Peter Cooper's gelatin were cheap, and turning it into something edible took a fraction of the time required to make the stuff from scratch. Cooper's patent called for dissolving powdered gelatin in hot water and then chilling the liquid to set it in a mold. Not too different from what Jell-O makers do today. After processing gelatin, manufacturers slice up the substance and dry it. Once the product has been dehydrated, it's ground into a fine powder. The special chemical properties of gelatin make it possible for home cooks to turn flavored powder into a jiggly dessert in the shape of their choice. At room temperature, collagen, which is what gelatin is made from, consists of a bunch of triple helixes. These helixes consist of 3 strands of amino acids called polypeptide chains wrapped around one another with weak bonds holding them together. When boiling water is poured over dry gelatin, these bonds dissolve and the helixes fall apart, leaving a puddle of loose polypeptide chains. Adding cold water to the liquid and chilling it in the fridge rebuilds the bonds in the triple helix structure, and any water that was added gets absorbed into the blob. The The chains form a kind of net that catches any excess water in its gaps. The strength of the triple helix structure combined with those water pockets is what makes Jell-O jiggle while still holding the shape of the vessel it was set in. Peter Cooper's invention could have been a game changer, but there's evidence that it never really caught on. In 1893, Philadelphia cooking school teacher Sarah Tyson Rohrer wrote a letter to the Knox Company asking them to create the very same product Cooper had already come up with, according to Carolyn Wyman's Jell-O, a biography. So it's pretty clear that powdered gelatin hadn't quite conquered the market. Cooper's patent had expired by then, and Knox made their own version of the product. Their unflavored powdered gelatin is still sold today. In fact, other manufacturers created similar products, but it took a couple by the name of Pearl and May Waite to take us from gelatin to Jell-O. According to the Oxford Companion to American Food and Drink, Pearl made and sold patent medicines, so he knew how to add colorings and flavorings to prettify products of unsavory origins, such as the boiled calf's feet used to make gelatin. May came up with the name Jell-O. She's also credited with adding fruity flavorings to the product, likely using syrups originally developed to make the Waite's medicines more palatable. After struggling to turn the brand into a successful enterprise, Pearl sold it to the Genesee Pure Food Company for $450, or roughly $11,000 today. Eventually, they were able to do what the Waites could not, make Jell-O a household name. From the beginning, Jell-O was available in a variety of sweet flavors like strawberry, orange, raspberry, and lemon, but this didn't stop people from using it in savory applications as European chefs had done with aspic in the past. The convenience product was so novel that home cooks took to using the flavored versions and recipes that called for plain gelatin alongside lemon juice. This was how Jell-O salads that towed the line between dinner and dessert came to be. When the Great Depression hit, Jell-O dishes in the style of Mrs. Cook's Perfection Salad became even more popular. In order to feed their families, home cooks couldn't let any food go to waste. Popping previously cooked meat and vegetables into a Jell-O mold was a clever way to both preserve leftovers and repurpose them into new dishes. This frugal mindset was carried into World War II, when Jell-O salads became a way to stretch rations into an impressive meal. The Jell-O craze reached its zenith in the 1950s. During this era, the women in charge of kitchens were faced with dueling expectations. Advancements in technology led to new appliances like refrigerators, as well as pre-prepared convenience items like TV dinners, which I covered in our last episode. This gave middle-class housewives more free hours in the day. At the same time, the pressure for women to perform the role of the perfect American wife and mother was greater than ever after World War II and at the start of the Cold War. At a lecture delivered at Harvard, historian Elizabeth Singer Moore said, "There was a universal idea of female primacy in the home for the good of their children and the good of the nation. The ideal way for women to serve their country in this time of national fear was by keeping population levels high in case war broke out with the Soviet Union. The housewife was also valuable as a symbol. In American propaganda, the country's domestic women provided a contrast to the Soviet women who worked in factories while leaving their children with government daycare workers." All of this meant that if women did have more time thanks to new technologies, they were still expected to fill it with household tasks. This led to convenience food items being used to make home-cooked meals that required more labor than opening a can. Jell-O salad was a perfect example. It took a processed food, powdered gelatin, and turned it into an elaborate-looking dish that showcased the cook's domestic skills. The colorful molds were reminiscent of the traditional aspics served to presidents and monarchs, but this 20th century version was much cheaper and easier to prepare. Much like the gelatins of the past, Jell-O salads in the 1950s were works of art. The recipes were all about presentation, and taste was arguably an afterthought. Cream cheese was sometimes folded into the Jell-O to change its opacity. Ingredients were chosen based on how they looked suspended in the mold. Fresh strawberry slices and marshmallows were floaters, while canned fruits and fresh grapes were sinkers. Floaters and sinkers, name a less appetizing duo. And like some kind of unholy birthday cake, Jell-O salad was often served with the frosting of mayonnaise spread on top. There was no limit to what went inside a Jell-O salad. One Jell-O ad from the 1950s called for grated onion, cottage cheese, and fish salad in a lime gelatin mold. Not terribly dissimilar from this nightmare here, which also features stuffed olives, pimiento peppers, and canned tuna. Blech. Eventually, the brand offered alternatives to customers who didn't want to mix sweet flavors with seafood. Celery, seasoned tomato, and Italian salad Jell-O mixes were introduced in the 1960s, but the flavors were short-lived. By the mid-1970s, Jell-O salads had fallen out of fashion, and the company pulled the savory varieties from stores to focus on marketing its products as a dessert. It only took a couple decades for Jell-O salad to go from fancy showstopper to kitschy oddity. Americans also became more conscious of their sugar intake in the 70s, and they grew wary of salads that tasted like candy. By this time, the rigid gender roles that defined the 50s had loosened, and more women were entering the workforce. A woman's value was no longer tied to how well she layered fish into her Jell-O mold. Jell-O salad may be mocked in the mainstream, but it's far from dead. The Mid-Century Supper Club is one group keeping the dish alive in the form of throwback potlucks. Since 2008, their dinner parties have showcased Jell-O molds alongside retro delicacies like shrimp Christmas trees, cocktail weenie towers, and pickle pinwheel platters. Say that 5 times fast. And Jell-O salad isn't limited to themed dinner parties. Many of the recipes that started on the backs of Jell-O boxes never stopped being family traditions. This is especially true in parts of the South, Midwest, and Utah, where gelatin is baked into the local cuisine, or rather it's boiled, cooled, and served with a dollop of mayonnaise on top. If you have an idea for an episode of Food History, drop it in the comments below, and tell me your own experiences with Jell-O salad if you've got them. My experience begins and hopefully ends with the ring around the tuna. Let's do this. I'm gonna get this over with. Bon appetit. Oh, there's so many textures. Wow, it's salty.